You have been asking for a new life. You have been asking with sincerity, with hunger, sometimes with desperation. You have prayed for it, visualized it, spoken it aloud, written it down, and yet something keeps returning you to the same place, the same fear, the same ceiling, the same morning where nothing has changed. What James Allen understood, and what most people never discover, is that you may not be failing because the life you want is unavailable to you. You may be failing because you keep returning every single day to the mind that rejects it. James Allen did not write for people who lacked desire. He wrote for people who possessed great desire and yet somehow could not hold what they were asking for. He identified something invisible, something most people never name. Something that operates not in the world outside you, but in the pattern of thought, feeling, and expectation you return to before you fall asleep. When you wake in the morning, when the bill arrives, when the door closes, when the silence comes back. He called it the mind, and he taught, with precision that still disturbs those who truly understand it, that the mind you practice is the life you live. You know what you want. That part is not the mystery. The mystery is why it keeps not arriving, or arriving briefly and then dissolving, or arriving in a form you cannot quite hold before it slips away again. You have felt the certainty that a change was coming. You have felt something shift inside you during a quiet moment, a prayer, a long drive, an unexpected conversation. And then days pass. And then the old pressure returns. And somehow you are back inside the familiar heaviness, moving through the same patterns, hearing the same arguments in your head, experiencing the same outcomes in your world. The desire to change is not the problem. The viewer who watches this kind of teaching is not someone who lacks intention. They are someone who has intention in abundance. They want financial peace. They want relief from the weight of scarcity. They want to walk through days without the low drumbeat of fear beneath every decision. They want to receive. They want to build. They want to feel the ease that seems to come so naturally to other people, but which has never quite settled into their own life for any lasting period of time. But what happens every evening when the day is done and the ambition quiets? What happens when the bill is larger than the account, when the job application goes unanswered, when the business does not grow the way you believed it would? What happens in those moments is the old mind returns. Not as an enemy that charges in with violence. It returns the way a river returns to its worn path after rain, gently, automatically, with a familiarity that almost feels like rest. The old mind does not announce itself. It does not say, "I am here to destroy the new life you are building." It simply arrives as the thought you have always had, the calculation that always ends in "not enough," the story that always ends in why it cannot work for someone like you, the voice that says, "Be careful, be realistic, do not get ahead of yourself, remember what happened last time." These are not new thoughts. They are old thoughts, practiced so deeply over so many years that they no longer feel like thoughts. They feel like truth. And so the desire runs forward while the mind pulls backward, and the gap between what you want and what you experience remains exactly as wide as the distance between the new life you are asking for and the old mind you are returning to. This is not a small observation. It is the central condition that James Allen spent his entire life translating into a language plain enough for anyone to receive. The outer world you inhabit is not an accident. It is a precise reflection of the inner world you keep practicing. You have likely blamed circumstance. You have blamed the economy, the timing, the people who did not help, the doors that did not open, the luck you were not given, the start you did not have. And perhaps some of those things carry partial truth. But James Allen would not allow you to stop there. He would sit across from you calmly, without cruelty, and he would ask you one thing. He would ask you, what is the dominant quality of the mind you return to when no one is watching and nothing is performing, and the day has stripped away all pretense? That mind, he would tell you, is the life you are building. The pattern is not random. The ceiling you keep meeting is not the ceiling of the world. It is the ceiling of the self. It is the upper boundary of what the mind you practice believes it can hold, deserve, or sustain without feeling threatened. And until that boundary moves from the inside, no amount of effort, no new information, no change strategy, no temporary motivation will permanently shift what the outer world reflects back to you. This is the visible problem. Not lack of desire, not lack of effort, not lack of prayer, not lack of intention. The visible problem is that you are a person of great desire, living in a mind that does not yet match that desire. And the gap between those two things is producing the life you are experiencing right now. Here is what makes this particularly difficult to confront. The contradiction is not between you and the world. The contradiction is between two versions of yourself operating simultaneously inside the same body. The same day, the same prayer. One self desires the new life genuinely. It feels the longing. It believes in certain moments that the new life is real and possible and close. The other self returns to the old agreements without question. It picks up the old story automatically. It reads every new situation through the lens of the old conclusion. These two selves do not take turns graciously. They do not agree to alternate days. The new self surges forward during moments of inspiration, and the old self waits. It waits because it knows something the new self has not yet understood. It knows that inspiration fades, that the morning arrives, that bills do not stop arriving, that other people do not change to accommodate your inner transformation, that life keeps presenting the same kinds of pressures that have always triggered the same kinds of responses. And in those moments, the old self does not have to fight. It simply steps back into the familiar position, and you go with it. This is why reading the right book, watching the right teaching, attending the right seminar, and even praying the right prayer can produce genuine feeling without producing lasting change. The feeling is real. The intention is real. But feeling and intention are not identity. They are visitors. Identity is what remains when the feeling has passed and the pressure has arrived and the choice must be made in real time without any inspirational support. Identity is what the mind defaults to when it is no longer being watched or performed or temporarily elevated. James Allen understood this with a precision that was rare in any era. He understood that people often confuse wishing with becoming. They confuse the desire for a thing with the inner readiness to hold that thing. They confuse the prayer with the preparation. They ask for abundance from a mind that has been practicing scarcity for 20 years. They ask for peace from a mind that has been practicing anxiety so long that anxiety now feels like responsibility. They ask for love from a mind that has been practicing unworthiness so consistently that receiving feels suspicious. The contradiction is not between what you deserve and what the world is offering. The contradiction is between what you are asking for outwardly and what you are practicing inwardly every day, in every small thought, in every quiet moment, in every response to pressure, in every return to the old story. The asking points forward, the practicing pulls backward, and the life you experience is produced by the practice, not the asking. This does not mean you should stop asking. It means you must understand what asking actually requires. Real asking, in the language of James Allen, is not a petition sent upward to some passive source that decides whether or not to grant your request. Real asking is a becoming. It is the willingness to develop the inner condition that is compatible with what you are seeking. It is the recognition that you cannot ask for a harvest while planting nothing, watering nothing, tending nothing in the soil of the mind. The discomfort of this teaching arrives here. Because if the outer life reflects the inner self being practiced, then the life you are experiencing right now is giving you precise information, not as punishment, not as cosmic judgment, but as feedback. The life you are living is showing you the dominant quality of the mind you have been practicing, and the life you desire is showing you the quality of mind you must now develop. Most people, when they hear this, feel either defensive or defeated. The old mind produces both of those responses automatically. It either argues that external forces are fully responsible for present conditions, which releases the self from any real authority, or it collapses into self-blame, which produces shame rather than transformation. James Allen did not want either response. He wanted something far more demanding and far more liberating. He wanted the reader to become genuinely responsible, not guilty, responsible, not crushed by the past, empowered by the recognition that if the mind creates the life, then a transformed mind can create a different life. That transformation is what this teaching is about, and it begins with the willingness to see the contradiction clearly, without flinching, without excuse, without collapse. You are asking for one thing and returning every day to the mind that makes that thing impossible to hold. That is the inner contradiction, and seeing it fully, with honesty and without cruelty toward yourself, is the first act of the new mind. James Allen was not a wealthy man in the conventional sense. He was a quiet man who lived simply, who walked the cliffs near his home in England, who wrote before the dawn in the early morning stillness. He did not build a speaking empire. He did not accumulate public fame during his lifetime. He wrote small books, careful books, books that said very little that was easy and a great deal that was true. And the teaching at the center of all of them was one that most people encounter and do not fully receive because they are not yet ready to accept the weight of what it means. The teaching is this: as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Not as a man wishes, not as a man prays in moments of desperation, not as a man believes theoretically on a good day. As a man thinks in his heart, in the deep habitual current of his inner life, in the quality of mind he returns to without being asked, so is he. So is his character. So is his destiny. So is his world. Allen taught that the mind is not a passive receiver of circumstances. The mind is a formative cause. Thought does not merely respond to life. Thought generates life. Not in the shallow sense that if you think pleasant thoughts, you will attract pleasant events like a spiritual magnet, but in the deeper, more demanding sense that the pattern of thinking a person practices over time becomes the pattern of character that person develops. And the pattern of character determines the quality of decisions, relationships, responses, opportunities accepted, opportunities rejected, and ultimately the circumstances that accumulate into what we call a life. This is not mysticism without substance. It is a law as consistent and as impersonal as any law in nature. Just as a field produces the crop that was planted in it, the mind produces the life that was cultivated within it. Not always immediately, not always in the exact form the thinker imagined, but with a consistency that Allen observed in human life across every condition, every background, every external circumstance. Those who cultivated a mind of order, courage, purpose, and honest work produced lives that reflected those qualities, even when beginning from poverty. Those who cultivated a mind of resentment, fear, complaint, and inaction produced lives that reflected those qualities, even when beginning with advantage. Allen was not saying that poverty is always the product of a weak mind, or that wealth is always the product of a strong one. He was far more careful than that. He was saying that the character a person develops determines the life that can grow from that character, and that character is shaped day after day by what the mind dwells upon, returns to, feeds, waters, and treats as real. The outer world is the garden. The inner mind is the gardener, and the crop cannot exceed the quality of what was planted and tended. What this means for someone sitting in financial fear is both sobering and liberating. It means that the condition they are experiencing is not simply the result of an unfair world, though the world can certainly be unfair. It is also the accumulated result of the inner condition they have been practicing. And that inner condition can be changed, not instantly, not without effort, but it can be changed. The gardener can begin planting different seeds. The soil of the mind can receive new thought if the old thought is genuinely released. The life that grows will eventually reflect the new cultivation. But this requires something most people are unwilling to offer fully. It requires intellectual honesty about what the mind has actually been practicing. Not what you believe in theory, not what you aspire to become, not what you say when you are performing a spiritual posture. What has the mind been actually doing in the quiet hours, in the unguarded moments, in the private conversation with itself at 2 in the morning, when fear is loudest? That is the thought that is becoming your character. That is the character that is becoming your circumstance. Allen wrote that men are anxious to improve their circumstances, but are unwilling to improve themselves. This remains one of the most precise diagnoses of the human condition ever written in the domain of spiritual prosperity teaching. People want a better job, a better home, a better relationship, a better financial position, and they pursue those things in the world of effects, in the visible outer world of circumstances and channels. But they leave the cause untouched. They leave the inner mind in the same condition that produced the current life, and then wonder why the new life will not come, or why it arrives briefly and then reverses, or why the same type of difficulty keeps reassembling itself in new forms. The law Alan taught has no exceptions. You cannot permanently build outside what you are consistently inside. You cannot hold in your life what you cannot hold in your mind. You cannot grow into a circumstance that your character has not yet grown to match. This is not limitation. This is law. And law, once understood, becomes not a prison, but a pathway. Because if thought shapes character and character shapes circumstance, then the one who becomes serious about the quality of their inner life becomes, for the first time, genuinely serious about the shape of their outer one. The masters who preceded Alan said similar things in different languages. Wattles spoke of holding the clear mental image and allowing the formless substance to take the form of that image. Murphy spoke of impressing the subconscious with the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Goddard spoke of living in the assumption of the state desired. But Alan's contribution was perhaps the most grounded, the most stripped of mystical complexity. He simply said, "You become what you think about, and what you become determines what you experience." That is the law. That is the whole teaching. And it is harder than it sounds, because the thinking that counts is not the thinking you do for 10 minutes in the morning. It is the thinking you do for the other 23 hours and 50 minutes. The question Alan's teaching ultimately places before every reader is not what do you want. The question is, who are you becoming? Not who do you wish you were, not who do you believe yourself to be in your best moments. Who are you becoming in the consistent, daily, unwitnessed practice of your inner life? That is the question that opens the law. That is the question this teaching is asking you to sit with, without flinching and without performance. Because the honest answer to that question is the beginning of a genuine transformation. Alan also taught that suffering is not without purpose when it is correctly understood. The difficult circumstance is not simply punishment or cosmic misfortune. It is information. It is the outer world delivering to the inner self a message about the quality of what has been cultivated, and the person who can read that message without collapsing into self-pity, without projecting all cause onto external forces, without running from the diagnosis, that person is already beginning to develop the character of one who can change their life. Understanding this law does not make the journey easy, it makes it real. It takes the process of transformation out of the category of magic and wishful thinking and places it in the category of serious inner work. Daily, consistent, patient, honest. This is what James Allen was actually teaching. Not that you can wish for wealth and receive it, but that you can cultivate the mind, the character, the inner quality that belongs to a prosperous life, and that cultivation, carried forward with patience and without retreat, eventually cannot be separated from the life it naturally produces. Here is what most people miss when they first encounter James Allen. They hear the teaching as being about positive thinking. They reduce it to the idea that if you think cheerful thoughts and avoid negative ones, good things will come to you. And they spend several weeks trying to suppress unhappy thoughts, feeling like a failure every time a dark one arrives, and eventually concluding that the law does not work because the positive thinking did not produce immediate results. That is a complete misreading. That is not what Allen taught. What Allen taught was not about the mood of the thought. It was about the identity behind the thought. He was talking about who you are in your habitual inner life, not whether your thoughts are pleasant or unpleasant on a given Tuesday. He was talking about the deep, settled pattern of who you take yourself to be, what you expect from life, what you believe yourself capable of receiving and holding, what you treat as normal, what you treat as threatening, what you believe you deserve. These are not thoughts you choose consciously every morning. They are the character that has been formed by years of practiced inner living. And that character is the real subject of Allen's law. When Allen said that thought becomes character and character becomes circumstance, he was not describing a process that takes an afternoon. He was describing a process that takes root slowly, grows consistently, and eventually becomes so embedded in who a person is that they can no longer separate themselves from it. This is why the old mind is so difficult to shift. It is not merely a collection of old thoughts. It is an old self. It is the self that has been shaped by years of certain ways of seeing, certain habitual responses, certain automatic interpretations of events, certain deeply installed beliefs about what is possible, what is safe, and what a person like you can expect from a world like this. The forgotten meaning of Alan's teaching is that transformation is not about thinking better thoughts. It is about becoming a different person, not performing differently while remaining the same person inside, actually becoming a different person. A person with a different habitual relationship to possibility, a person with a different settled expectation, a person with a different automatic response to opportunity, to pressure, to silence, to the unknown. A person who is genuinely different on the inside, not just aspiring to be different or trying to behave as though they are different. This is what makes Alan's teaching simultaneously more difficult and more powerful than the shallow versions of the law of attraction that pass through popular culture every few years. Alan was not offering a technique. He was describing a transformation of character, and character is not changed by a technique. It is changed by the slow, patient, honest daily work of choosing a different quality of inner life and refusing again and again to return to the old one. The old mind is not merely a set of negative thoughts you can replace with positive ones. It is a familiar self with familiar loyalties, familiar fears, familiar ways of relating to the world that feel so natural, so automatic, so obviously correct that they do not present themselves as choices. They present themselves as reality. And that is precisely why they are so powerful. You cannot change what you do not first recognize as a pattern, and you cannot recognize a pattern that has become so habitual it feels like the truth of who you are. Alan wanted his readers to arrive at a particular moment of seeing, a moment where you look honestly at the pattern of your inner life, not with shame and not with excuse, and you recognize that the self you have been practicing is the self that has been producing the life you are living. And then you recognize that a different self, genuinely developed through sustained inner work, would naturally produce a different life. Not because the world changes first, but because a different character makes different decisions, reads situations differently, responds to pressure differently, accepts different opportunities, and projects into the world a different quality of signal. The identity you inhabit determines what feels normal, and what feels normal is what you unconsciously work to recreate, even when you consciously desire something different. This is the mechanism, and understanding it is not merely an intellectual exercise. Understanding it changes how you approach every moment of the inner life, because once you understand that the old mind is an old self you keep inhabiting, you also understand that the work is not to think differently for a morning. The work is to stop inhabiting the old self, to vacate it. To practice the inner life of the new self long enough, consistently enough, seriously enough, that the new self becomes the natural occupant and the old one loses its automatic claim on your daily experience. That is what James Allen was teaching. Not a mental technique, a genuine becoming. And genuine becoming is difficult, slow, and absolutely real. It produces real character. Real character produces real circumstances. And real circumstances built from the inside out do not dissolve when the morning arrives and the bill comes and the old pressure returns. Because the person who built them from a genuinely transformed inner life has a genuine inner life to return to. Not a technique, not a temporary mood, a self. This is why Alan's small books have outlasted most of the elaborate success systems of every era in which they have been encountered. Because he was talking about something real. He was talking about the actual mechanism by which a human life changes from the inside. And the actual mechanism is patient, demanding, honest, and cannot be shortcut by any system that leaves the inner self untouched. The error most people make when they encounter prosperity, teaching is not that they do not want to change. It is not that they do not believe in the law. The error is in how they imagine change works. They imagine that the desired life can be added to the existing self. They imagine that with the right information, the right practice, the right prayer, the right financial strategy, the new circumstances can be layered on top of the old identity without the old identity ever being fundamentally disturbed. This is the invisible error. And it explains more about stalled transformation than almost anything else in the study of inner prosperity. Think about what it would mean to physically place something valuable into a container that was built for something else. A vessel designed to hold sand does not suddenly become capable of holding water simply because water is poured into it. The vessel must change. The structure must become different. And what Alan understood, with a precision that cuts through every comfortable version of prosperity teaching, is that the human mind is not a neutral container. It is an active, shaped, habitual structure, and it has been shaped over years to hold a particular kind of inner life. When a new outer life is introduced before that structure has changed, the old structure does not celebrate the arrival. It rejects it. This rejection does not always happen dramatically. It rarely announces itself as rejection. Instead, it arrives as doubt, as the sudden awareness of everything that could go wrong, as the quiet voice that says this is not really for someone like you, as the memory of every time something similar did not work, as the fatigue that makes continued effort feel unreasonable, as the gradual drift back toward the familiar, which feels so much more like home than the new and unfamiliar possibility ever could. And so the new life, which arrived at the outer level, cannot find a matching inner condition, and it dissolves, or is pushed away, or is self-sabotaged back into non-existence. People who have experienced this pattern know its texture precisely. They can describe the moment of hope, the moment where something opened, the opportunity, the financial breakthrough, the relationship that carried real potential, the creative project that felt genuinely promising. And they can describe with equal precision the gradual or sudden way in which the old self reasserted its position, the hesitation, the perfectionism that paralyzed action, the resentment that destroyed the relationship, the spending that dissolved the financial gain, the withdrawal that starved the creative project. The old self did not fail to protect itself. It protected itself expertly. It simply confused protection with poverty. James Allen would say that this is not failure. It is perfect consistency. The outer life is in perfect agreement with the inner life. The problem is not that the law failed to work. The problem is that the law worked exactly as it always does. The inner self being practiced produced the outer life that matched it. When something arrived that did not match the practiced inner self, the practiced inner self corrected the discrepancy, not by rising to meet the new life, but by pulling the new life down to the level of the old one. This is why temporary inspiration is not transformation. Inspiration visits, character remains. And character, not inspiration, is the force that shapes what can settle into a life and remain there. The viewer who attends the seminar, who reads the book, who experiences the breakthrough prayer, who receives the unexpected financial gift, who lands the new opportunity, and who then returns to the old inner self within days or weeks, that viewer is experiencing exactly the mechanism Alan described. The outer shift could not be sustained because the inner shift did not precede it. The error is attempting to receive without becoming, attempting to hold the new life in the old hands, attempting to live in the new house while the old self still considers the familiar poverty its true address. And the old self, no matter how sincerely you desire to leave it, has enormous structural loyalty to its own patterns. It does not release them simply because you have asked it to. It releases them when you have done the patient, consistent, unglamorous work of building the new self that genuinely replaces it. This is not discouraging information. It is clarifying information. Because once you see the error clearly, you can stop making it. You can stop trying to add the new life to the old self. You can stop wondering why the breakthrough never lasts, why the money arrives and then disappears, why the opportunity appears and then closes. You can begin instead the real work, which is the work of the inner life, the work of becoming the person whose natural inner condition matches the outer life you are asking for, not performing that person, becoming them. Alan wrote that circumstances do not make the man, they reveal him. This is one of the most precise statements ever written about the relationship between the inner life and the outer world. Circumstances do not create your character, they surface it. They bring into visibility what was already present in the depths of the practiced mind. And so, if you want different circumstances to be able to stay, You must develop a different character for them to surface. A character that does not read abundance as threat. A character that does not interpret receiving as vulnerability. A character that does not need to sabotage its own success in order to return to the only level of life it knows how to inhabit. That character is built from the inside. It is built through the daily, patient, honest practice of thinking as the person you intend to become, not in performance, but in genuine inner living. It is built by refusing again and again to return to the old mind simply because the old mind feels like home. It is built by recognizing that home is not a feeling of familiarity. Home is the inner condition you have developed enough to inhabit without effort, and right now the old mind feels like home because you have practiced it for years. The new mind will feel like home when you have practiced it, with equal consistency and equal commitment. The invisible error was not that you desired wrongly. The invisible error was that you tried to receive without becoming. That ends here. Not because the desire was insufficient, because now the law has been made visible, and a law that has been made visible can finally be applied. You are not unworthy of the life you desire. You are simply not yet fully inhabiting the mind that belongs to it. That is not a verdict. That is a direction. The direction is inward. The direction is toward becoming. And the becoming begins in the next moment you choose, consciously, to practice the mind of the life you desire instead of the mind of the life you are leaving. Here is why this is so difficult to break. The old mind does not present itself as a prison. It presents itself as protection. It does not arrive with the face of limitation. It arrives with the face of reasonable caution. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like the hard-earned lessons of a person who has been through difficulty and survived by being careful. And in many ways, it was formed by exactly those experiences, which is why confronting it requires not cruelty, but compassion, and not guilt, but clarity. The old mind was built for a reason. It was built in response to real experiences. Perhaps the early experience of financial instability taught the inner self that security is fragile and must be held tightly. Perhaps the experience of rejection taught the inner self that ambition leads to humiliation and must be managed carefully. Perhaps the experience of loss taught the inner self that hope is dangerous because it opens you to pain, and therefore hope must be rationed or avoided entirely. These are not irrational responses. They are intelligent adaptations to real conditions. The problem is not that the old mind formed. The problem is that it remained. It remained as a governing structure long after the original conditions that created it had passed. Long after childhood became adulthood. Long after the specific person or circumstance that first produced the fear ceased to be relevant. The old mind kept running its protective program, scanning every new situation for the familiar danger, preparing the familiar response, issuing the familiar warnings. This is what survival patterns do. They generalize. A mind that learned that financial hope leads to disappointment will apply that conclusion to every new financial opportunity, regardless of whether that opportunity carries any of the original conditions that justified the original fear. And because the old mind is not lazy, because it is actually quite active and quite intelligent in its own way, it is very good at producing convincing arguments for its conclusions. It gathers evidence. When you are in the grip of the old mind, you will notice that it never seems to be short of reasons. It finds every relevant piece of evidence that confirms its position, every story of someone who tried and failed, every memory of your own failures, every way in which the current situation is similar to a past situation that ended badly. The old mind curates its evidence with remarkable efficiency, and because the evidence feels real, because it is drawn from real experience, the conclusions feel like wisdom rather than like fear wearing the costume of wisdom. Alan understood this. He wrote with compassion for the person who is not simply lazy or uncommitted, but who is genuinely trapped in a pattern of thought that feels like safety, that feels like realism, that feels like the responsible way to move through a difficult world. He was not writing for people who did not care. He was writing for people who cared deeply, but whose caring was caught in a mental structure that continually generated reasons why the desired life was either unavailable, unsuitable, or dangerous. The feeling of the old mind is comfort. Not happiness necessarily, but comfort. The comfort of the known, the comfort of the familiar pattern, even when that pattern is painful, because at least the pain is recognizable and the response is practiced. There is something in the human system that finds the familiar easier than the unfamiliar, even when the familiar is suffering and the unfamiliar is liberation. This is not weakness. It is one of the most human things imaginable, and James Allen did not write about it with judgment. He wrote about it with the steady gaze of someone who understood it deeply and who believed without reservation that understanding it was the first step to moving beyond it. So when the old mind returns and says, "Be careful, remember what happened before. This is not for someone like you, this is too good. Something will go wrong, do not get too hopeful. Protect yourself from disappointment. Know your place." It is not issuing these warnings out of malice. It is doing what it was built to do, and it built itself in many cases out of genuine love for your survival. The challenge of the new life is not to destroy that self with violence. The challenge is to thank it for its service, recognize that its time as the governing authority is over, and begin patiently and seriously to develop the new authority that belongs to the life you are moving toward. To understand why the old mind is so effective at preventing the new life, you must understand that the old mind does not simply ignore new opportunities. It actively filters them. It processes every new situation through the lens of its accumulated conclusions, and it translates what it finds into a language consistent with those conclusions. A mind that believes money is dangerous will not simply fail to pursue wealth. It will interpret every approach to wealth as evidence of danger. A mind that believes success leads to isolation will not simply avoid success. It will translate every successful step forward into a sign that isolation is approaching. The filter is not passive, it is continuously interpretive. This means that the same door can look like an open invitation to one mind and a warning sign to another. The same opportunity can feel like a natural next step to the person whose inner self is aligned with receiving it, and like a suspicious, premature, and likely to fail proposition to the person whose inner self is built around familiar scarcity. The outer reality has not changed. The situation is the same, but the mind doing the interpreting produces entirely different readings of the same facts, and those readings determine the response, and the response determines the outcome. Consider the person who receives an unexpected opportunity to expand their income through an unfamiliar path. The new mind, the mind that belongs to the desired life, reads this as, "A door is opening. I will walk through it with intelligence and care." The old mind reads the same opportunity as, "This is unfamiliar. Unfamiliar things have disappointed me before. There must be something wrong with this that I am not seeing yet. I should wait until I understand it fully before committing. I should research it until I feel certain, and the research continues until the opportunity closes, and the old mind concludes that it was right to be cautious because the opportunity disappeared. What the old mind does not recognize is that the opportunity disappeared because the old mind refused to meet it. This filtering extends beyond obvious decisions. It operates in the smallest daily moments. The old mind filters how you read a compliment, interpreting praise as pressure rather than genuine recognition. It filters how you read silence from someone who matters, interpreting absence as rejection rather than as ordinary life. It filters how you read financial information, interpreting every positive trend as temporary and every negative trend as confirmation of the permanent condition. The old mind does not take a day off. It is filtering continuously, translating the raw material of your daily experience into a consistent story that confirms the conclusions it was built upon, and the story it tells is internally coherent. That is the most important thing to understand about the old mind's filtering system. It does not produce obvious lies. It produces a coherent narrative that feels like honest observation. The person in the grip of the old mind is not deluded in a visible way. They are very often highly intelligent, highly observant, and highly skilled at identifying real risks and real patterns. But their intelligence and their observation are being directed by a filter that was set long ago. And the filter has a bias. It is biased toward confirming the familiar. It is biased toward finding the evidence that says, "Stay where you are because the world beyond where you are is dangerous." James Allen's teaching confronts this mechanism not by telling you to ignore risk or pretend that challenges are not real. It confronts it by asking a different question. The question is not whether risk exists. Risk always exists. The question is, what quality of mind do you want to bring to the reality before you? Because the reality will be interpreted by whatever mind you are practicing. And the mind you are practicing will determine not just what you see, but what you do with what you see. And what you do with what you see will determine what happens next. The old mind does not only filter perception, it also filters speech. A person practicing the old mind will consistently speak in ways that confirm the filter's conclusions. They will describe their financial life in the language of permanent limitation. They will speak of money as though it is always too scarce, always more distant than needed, always arriving less reliably than it should. They will speak of opportunity as though it always comes too late, too small, or with conditions that make it unsuitable. And every time these things are spoken, the filter is strengthened, because speech is not neutral. Speech is an act of the mind, and the repeated act of speaking limitation into the territory of one's life reinforces the structure that produces that limitation. Florence Scovel Shinn, whose teachings run beside Allen's in the stream of this wisdom, said that your word is your wand. But Allen's foundation must precede Shinn's application, because the word that proceeds from the old mind will always be a word of the old life, regardless of how sincerely the speaker desires the new one. You cannot speak wealth into the world from a mind that is filtering wealth as dangerous. The words will carry the frequency of the filter, not the frequency of the desire. The filter must change. The inner self must change. The character must change. And then the speech that naturally arises from the changed character becomes the natural wand of a genuine prosperity consciousness. The old mind also filters how the body responds to new circumstances. When the body is governed by an old identity of scarcity, it produces a physical posture of contraction in the presence of abundance. A tight chest when money arrives unexpectedly. A vague anxiety when things go better than expected. A restless discomfort when life presents an unusual level of peace or ease. These are not random reactions. They are the body faithfully reporting what the mind believes, and they contribute to behavior that corrects the unusual prosperity back to the familiar poverty, because the discomfort of the unfamiliar drives a person toward whatever will return them to the level of experience that the old self recognizes as normal. The mechanism is therefore not mysterious. It is not a matter of cosmic forces conspiring to withhold good things from deserving people. It is the perfectly logical operation of a habitual mind, doing exactly what habitual minds do, recreating the experience that is consistent with their settled conclusions. The new life cannot arrive and remain until the settled conclusions change, not just the surface thoughts. The deep, practiced automatic conclusions that run below conscious awareness and direct perception, speech, decision, and action toward outcomes consistent with the old self's governing beliefs. Understanding this mechanism is not a cause for despair, it is a cause for precision. Because if you understand how the filter works, you can begin to identify when it is operating. You can begin to notice when you are reading an opportunity through the old fear rather than through the new faith. You can begin to catch the old conclusion before it produces the old response. And in that catching, in that moment of awareness between the old trigger and the old reaction, the new self has room to speak. The new self has room to choose a different interpretation, a different response, a different direction. That catching is not automatic. It must be practiced. It requires the kind of sustained inner attention that most people are not accustomed to giving themselves, because the culture does not teach it, and the old mind actively discourages it. But it is possible, and Allen's entire body of work is essentially a training in exactly that practice. The practice of becoming a person who can see their own mental patterns with enough clarity and enough compassion to redirect them toward the character that belongs to the life they desire. The old mind filters reality. That is the mechanism, and the filter can be changed, not instantly, not by a single act of will, but by the patient, consistent, honest cultivation of a different inner self, a self that reads opportunity as invitation rather than threat, a self that reads abundance as natural rather than suspicious, a self that reads the future as something that can be built rather than something that must be feared. That different self is not pretend. It is possible, and it is built, as everything Alan taught, from the inside out. The mechanism does not stay internal. This is the part that connects the invisible law to the visible life with precision. The old mind's filtering of reality does not remain a private psychological event. It produces behavior, and behavior produces outcomes, and outcomes accumulate into circumstances. And circumstances, when they are the accumulated result of years of old mind behavior, can look so solid, so established, so objectively fixed, that they seem to have nothing to do with the inner life at all. That is the final layer of the illusion. The outer life looks like the cause of the inner suffering, when in truth the inner life has been the cause of the outer circumstance all along. Consider self-sabotage, which is perhaps the most visible form of this mechanism. Self-sabotage is not random. It is the old self correcting a discrepancy. When a person whose inner self is built around a particular level of income suddenly begins earning significantly more, the old self experiences this as disequilibrium, not consciously, not as a deliberate choice, but as a deep automatic signal that says something is wrong, something is off. This level of life does not match the self that is operating, and the old self corrects. It creates an expense that absorbs the surplus. It generates a conflict that damages the income source. It produces an illness that forces a pause. It inspires a decision that undoes the gain. Not out of malice, out of fidelity to the only self it knows how to be. James Allen would not have used the word self-sabotage, but he described the phenomenon with perfect accuracy. He described how the person of weak character cannot hold what the person of strong character builds naturally. And he made clear that this is not moral judgment. It is a description of how character and circumstance are inseparably linked. The character that built the old life is the same character that will dismantle the new one if the character itself does not change. Hesitation is another form of this mechanism. The old mind hesitates not because it lacks information, but because it experiences the new opportunity as threatening. And because the hesitation feels like wisdom, because it presents itself as the reasonable pause of a careful person, it is accepted without examination. The window closes. The moment passes. The old mind registers this as confirmation that the opportunity was not real or not ready or not right, rather than recognizing that the hesitation itself closed the window. And the next time a similar opportunity arrives, the same hesitation will be available, with the additional evidence of the last missed opportunity to justify it. Wrong speech is another mechanism by which the old mind converts inner rejection into outer circumstance. The person who speaks habitually of lack speaks lack into their relationships, their negotiations, their self-presentation, their professional encounters. They signal scarcity in contexts where abundance was possible, and abundance, encountering a consistent signal of scarcity, flows elsewhere. Not because the universe is punishing the scarce thinker, but because people, opportunities, and resources naturally move towards signals of capacity and away from signals of contraction. This is not mystical. It is observably true in every domain of human interaction. Missed opportunities accumulate into a pattern that eventually feels like destiny. The person who, over years, has habitually hesitated at the moment of opportunity, who has consistently read the open door as a threatening gap rather than an invitation, who has consistently spoken in the language of their limitation rather than their capacity. That person will look back at their life and see a pattern of near misses, of close calls that never quite landed, of promise that never quite fulfilled. And they will attribute this to fate, or to bad luck, or to a world that did not give them what it gave others. What they will not see, because the old mind has always provided an alternative explanation, is that the pattern was consistent with the inner self being practiced through all of those years. The return to familiar poverty is perhaps the most heartbreaking expression of this mechanism. A person receives a genuine financial opening, something real changes in their outer world, and then, over a period of months, sometimes years, The financial position drifts back to its original level or something close to it. Not because the money was stolen, not because the opportunity was false, but because the character that received the opening was the same character that was comfortable at the original level. And that character made the 1,000 small decisions, spent the money in the familiar way, left the relationships in the familiar condition, operated the business with the familiar level of expectation and ambition that naturally returned the outer life to the level matching the inner self. This is not a pattern unique to people in financial hardship. It appears at every income level. The pattern of return is simply calibrated to whatever level of prosperity the old mind considers normal and manageable. Someone whose old mind is built around a middle level of comfort will self-correct back to that middle level, just as reliably as someone whose old mind is built around poverty will self-correct back to poverty. The mechanism is the same, only the calibration differs. Alan did not write about these things to produce despair. He wrote about them because he believed deeply that a person who could see the mechanism clearly was a person who was finally equipped to change it. Seeing the mechanism removes the mystery. It removes the victimhood. It removes the helplessness that comes from believing the outer world is the cause of the inner suffering. Because once you see that the inner self is the cause, you recover authority over your own life in a way that nothing external could ever provide. The authority is this: the character can be changed. The old mind can be replaced by a new one, not in a day, not by a single act of will, but through the patient, consistent, serious cultivation of a genuinely different inner life. A life of thought that is oriented toward possibility rather than threat, toward capacity rather than limitation, toward receiving rather than protecting, toward the new self rather than the familiar old one. This cultivation is the real work of prosperity. It is the work that produces real character, and real character over time can produce real circumstances that are not only achieved but sustained, because the inner life that built them is capable of holding them. Something must be decided now, not tomorrow, not when the circumstances improve, not when the fear quiets, not when the evidence of the new life has already appeared. Now, because the decision to become the new mind is not a decision that waits for outer confirmation. It is a decision made in the presence of the old life, in the middle of the old circumstances, before the new ones have assembled. It is made here from this position by a self that is serious enough about the desired life to stop asking for it from a distance and begin inhabiting it from the inside. The shift James Allen describes is not a shift in affirmation. It is not a shift in vocabulary. It is not a shift in spiritual technique. It is a shift in identity. It is the recognition that you do not merely want the new life. You must become the mind that belongs to it, and becoming that mind is a daily interior act of choosing which self will be the governing self in this moment, in this response, in this interpretation of this event, in this decision about this opportunity, in this quality of thought you bring to this quiet hour. The new posture is this: I do not ask for a life I refuse to become. This is not a confession of weakness. It is a declaration of authority. It is the recognition that asking and becoming are not separate activities. They are the same activity viewed from the inside and the outside. What you are genuinely becoming on the inside is what you are genuinely asking for on the outside. And what you are actually practicing on the inside is what you are actually receiving on the outside. The shift begins when these two things are brought into alignment, not by forcing the outside to match a wish, but by cultivating the inside to match the desired outside through the slow, honest, patient work of genuine becoming. This means that the shift begins not in a grand declaration, but in a small, quiet, often unwitnessed act of choosing a different thought when the old thought arises. It begins in the moment when the old filter offers its familiar interpretation, and you pause, and you recognize the filter, and you choose a different one. Not because the different interpretation is certainly true, but because the mind you are practicing is the mind you are becoming. And the mind you are becoming is the life you are building, and you have decided that you are building a different life. The old mind will not applaud this decision. It will not make room graciously. It will continue to offer its familiar reasoning. It will continue to present its evidence. It will continue to feel more natural, more honest, more realistic than the new mind you are attempting to practice. This is expected. This is not failure. This is what the shift feels like in its early stages. It feels like choosing what is true against the pressure of what is familiar. And that pressure is real, but the pressure diminishes with practice. Every time you refuse the old mind without cruelty but with firmness, you withdraw a little of its authority. And every time you inhabit the new mind, even briefly, even imperfectly, you deposit a little of the new character into the soil of your inner life. Alan wrote about this process with the image of the gardener and the garden. The mind is a garden, and every thought is either a seed or a weed. The gardener does not force flowers to grow by shouting at the soil. The gardener prepares the soil, plants the right seed, waters it consistently, removes the weeds patiently, and trusts the law that a well-tended seed in good soil will produce fruit. The shift into the new mind is this tending, day after day, without guarantee of immediate visible result, in trust that the law is working even when the ground still looks like it did before. The shift also requires a change in what the self treats as normal. The old mind treats limitation as normal and abundance as suspicious. The new mind must begin treating prosperity as the natural condition of a mind aligned with the source, and treating limitation as a temporary condition in the process of being corrected. Not as performance, not as denial of present reality, but as a genuine inner repositioning of what the self considers its natural home. This repositioning is not achieved by telling yourself that limitation is not real. It is achieved by developing such a consistent inner relationship with the image of the desired life that the desired life begins to feel more native to your identity than the old life ever did. The new identity is not a pretense. It is a project. You are building a self. You are building it thought by thought, response by response, choice by choice, in every quiet moment and every pressured moment and every moment between. You are building a self that can receive what you are asking for, hold what you have received, and naturally produce more of the same because the inner condition that generated it has become your genuine settled character. This is not wishful thinking. This is the most serious form of prosperity work that exists. It has no shortcut, it has no substitute, and it has no ceiling. James Allen did not promise that this shift would be painless. He promised that it was possible. He promised that the law operated consistently and without exception. He promised that the self genuinely developed by honest inner work would produce a life genuinely consistent with that developed self. He asked only for the willingness to do the real inner work, to stop trying to change the surface, to stop trying to manage the effects, to go to the cause, to go to the mind, to go to the character, to go to the self that is being practiced daily in the unwitnessed hours, and to change that self, patiently, seriously, honestly, from the inside out. You are not too late. The law does not discriminate by age, by history, by the number of previous failures, by the depth of the current difficulty. The law responds to the character being cultivated right now, not the character of 10 years ago, not the character of the last failed attempt, the character of this moment, this practice, this new daily discipline of the inner life. Begin now, not dramatically, not with a performance of transformation. Begin in the quiet interior of this moment by choosing even once the thought that belongs to the self you are becoming instead of the thought that belongs to the self you are leaving. That one choice, made genuinely, is the beginning of the shift, and the beginning of the shift, followed consistently, is the beginning of a different life. Not promised to arrive tomorrow, but being built from this moment in the only place a life can ever truly be built, inside. The self you are becoming is not a stranger. It is not foreign. It is the self that has been waiting behind the old mind, quietly, patiently, through every attempt and every retreat. It is the self that knew the old life was not the final story. It is the self that felt the call of the desired life and recognized it as real. That self is already present. It is not being created from nothing. It is being uncovered, developed, given room, given daily exercise, given the consistent practice of a new inner life until it becomes strong enough to be the governing authority rather than the hopeful visitor. Become what you desire, not one day, now, in this thought, in this response, in this choice. This is the shift. Every day presents the opportunity to practice the old mind or the new mind. Not in one grand moment of decision, in many small ordinary moments that accumulate over time into the character that determines the life. This is why the daily practice matters so much, and why it must be specific enough to actually apply in real time rather than remaining a beautiful idea that is agreed with in theory and forgotten in practice. The practice is this: in any moment of decision, of response, of interpretation, of speech, of emotion, of opportunity, you pause and you ask one question. You ask, what would the mind of the life I desire think, say, and do here? Not what would a perfect person do, not what would a fictional, wealthy ideal do in some imagined scenario. What would the mind of the specific life you desire, the financial peace, the creative freedom, the spiritual certainty, the genuine prosperity, what would that mind bring to this exact moment? Begin each morning with this question, before the old mind has fully assembled its familiar agenda, before the phone is checked, before the financial anxiety has established its position for the day, before the planning and calculating and worrying have occupied the inner space. In those first quiet minutes, ask, who is the self I am practicing today? And choose deliberately the self of the desired life, not as performance, as genuine interior choice, as the gardener arriving at the garden in the morning and choosing what to plant. When the old thought arrives, and it will, treat it as information rather than instruction. The old thought says, you cannot afford this, you will fail, this is too risky, remember what happened before. When this arrives, you do not attack it, you do not argue with it, you do not pretend it is not present, you simply observe it. You say internally, that is the old mind speaking, I recognize it. And then you return to the question, what would the mind of the desired life think here? And you practice that thought, not because it erases the old one instantly, but because practice is how character is built, and character is what this work requires. This practice must not become a standard of perfection that produces guilt when the old mind breaks through, because it will break through, especially early, especially under pressure, especially when the old familiar circumstances are most insistently present. The practice is not about achieving a state where the old mind never speaks. It is about developing the new mind until it becomes the dominant voice. The majority of your inner conversation, not the totality but the majority, gradually shifts from the old pattern to the new. And that majority is sufficient for the law to begin producing different fruit. At the end of each day, ask a simple accounting question, not a shaming review, a gentle, honest inventory. Where today did I practice the old mind? Where today did I practice the new one? What was the difference between the two choices? What can I do differently tomorrow? This is not self-criticism. This is the work of a conscious inner gardener who reviews the day's tending with the same honest care they would bring to any real garden they were serious about growing. In moments of financial pressure specifically, the practice takes a particular form. When the bill arrives, when the account is lower than needed, when the expected income does not appear, when the opportunity closes, the old mind rushes in with its familiar crisis response. The new mind does not deny the reality of the pressure. It holds the reality of the pressure alongside the reality of the law. It says, this is the present condition. It is not the final condition. The law is working. The character I am building is producing a different circumstance. I remain here in this practice, in this inner identity, and I act from this place rather than from panic. The practice is not designed to eliminate effort. James Allen always preserved the relationship between inner cultivation and outer action. The new mind does not produce passivity. It produces the right kind of action, which is action that flows from the character of the desired life rather than from the panic of the old one. The new mind asks not only what would the desired life think here, but what would the desired life do here? And then it does that thing, not perfectly, not without fear, but with the sincere alignment between inner identity and outer action that Allen described as the natural expression of developed character. Make the practice physical where possible. Write the central question in a place you will see it. Speak it aloud in the morning before the day has filled the space. Return to it in the middle of the afternoon when the pressure is highest and the old mind is most insistent. The question is your anchor. What would the mind of the life I desire think, say, and do here? That question, asked honestly and answered as genuinely as possible, even when the answer is difficult, even when the answer requires more courage than comfort, is the daily engine of the transformation James Allen described. You are not required to become the new self entirely before you practice it. You are required to practice it before you have become it. This is the nature of all genuine development. The musician practices the piece before they have mastered it. The gardener tends the soil before the fruit appears. The new self must be practiced before it is fully formed, and it will be fully formed through the practice. There is no other way, there is no shortcut. There is only the honest, patient, daily, interior choice of which mind governs today. The old mind will return. This is not a failure. This is not evidence that the practice has been wasted, or that the law is not working, or that you are somehow unable to change. The return of the old mind under pressure is one of the most predictable events in the entire process of inner transformation. Prepare for it now, not so you are defeated by it in advance, but so you are not surprised by it when it arrives. Because the person who is surprised by the return of the old mind is far more likely to surrender to it than the person who expected it and is ready. The return will not always announce itself dramatically. It rarely arrives with a single obvious assault. More often it arrives gradually through accumulation. A difficult bill arrives, and the old mind offers its familiar analysis of what this means. Then a planned income does not appear on schedule, and the old mind deepens its position. Then a relationship produces tension, and the old mind draws on its accumulated evidence to conclude that everything is going wrong, that the new practice has failed, that the old life is reasserting itself because it was always the real life, and the new practice was wishful thinking. The old mind uses fatigue particularly well. It knows that a tired person is a person whose vigilance has lowered. It knows that after a long week of pressure, after nights of insufficient sleep, after the accumulated weight of visible difficulty, the inner discipline that seemed so available in the morning of a fresh and hopeful day becomes much harder to sustain. And in the fatigue, the old patterns feel more forgiving than the demanding practice of the new mind. The old mind offers familiarity as rest, and the tired self, reaching for anything that feels like ease, can find itself back inside the old identity, before the choice was even consciously made. Criticism from others also returns the old mind with force. When someone who matters questions the new direction, mocks the new thinking, reminds you of past failures, or simply does not share the vision of the life you are building toward, the old mind responds with its most powerful argument. See, even the people who know you best do not believe this is possible. This is not a small argument to overcome. The human being is a social creature, and the judgments of those close to us carry enormous weight in the inner life. Allen understood this. He wrote for people who were building something new in the presence of those who preferred the old. And he wrote with the clear understanding that the character being built must eventually become strong enough to sustain itself without universal approval. Rejection of any kind, the application denied, the proposal ignored, the opportunity that did not come through, these become the old mind's highest quality ammunition, because rejection can be read as evidence, and the old mind is expert at reading evidence. It takes the single rejection and places it in the context of all the previous rejections, all the previous disappointments, all the previous times that something similar was tried and did not succeed, and it constructs from this material a conclusion that feels deeply, objectively, honestly true. And the conclusion is, this is how my life works. And the implied directive is, stop pretending it can be otherwise. Silence is another form of the test. The silence after a sincere prayer. The silence after a period of genuine inner work. The silence when no sign of the new life has yet appeared in the outer world to validate the inner practice. The silence is particularly difficult because it offers nothing to respond to. There is no argument to counter, no evidence to reinterpret, no person to speak to. There is only the absence of confirmation. And the old mind in the presence of silence begins to construct its own narrative to fill the void. And the narrative it constructs is always consistent with its deepest conclusion, which is that the desired life is not coming, that the practice is not working, that the investment of inner effort has once again produced no return. Old memories arrive during the test, memories with emotional weight, the memory of a specific financial disaster, the memory of a specific humiliation, the memory of the last time hope was extended and then withdrawn. These memories do not arrive neutrally, they arrive with feeling, with the same quality of emotion that accompanied the original event, and the old mind uses that emotion as evidence, as though the past event is not merely remembered but is currently true, as though the memory of failure is proof of permanent failure, as though the past is also the future. James Allen would tell you that the test is not a punishment, the test is part of the cultivation. The gardener who plants in spring and then faces a difficult frost in late season is not being told that the garden was a mistake. They are being asked whether they are a gardener who tends through difficulty or a person who only gardens when the weather cooperates. The test reveals the current strength of the new identity, not to defeat it, but to show it where it needs more depth, more root, more genuine inner work, before it is strong enough to hold in all conditions. Do not interpret the return of the old mind as the end of the transformation. Interpret it as information about where the new mind has not yet fully rooted. The old mind returns most powerfully in the areas where the new identity has been practiced least consistently. This is useful information. It shows you where to direct the deepest attention, where the daily practice needs the most focus, where the old conclusions are still most deeply entrenched and most resistant to replacement. The response to the return of the old mind is not self-punishment. It is not guilt. It is not the conclusion that you are unable to change. The response is recognition and return. You recognize that the old mind has reasserted itself. You do not dramatize this recognition. You do not celebrate it. You do not condemn yourself for it. You simply recognize it as a gardener recognizes a weed, and you return to the practice of the new mind. You ask again, what would the mind of the life I desire think, say, and do here? And you practice that answer. Not perfectly, but genuinely, and then again tomorrow and the day after that. The person who is building a genuinely new inner life will return to the practice after every return of the old mind. Not always instantly, sometimes with a delay, sometimes with frustration, sometimes with the full acknowledgement that it has been a hard week and the old mind dominated more than the new, but always, eventually, with the return to the practice. Because the return to the practice is itself the practice. It is not a sign of weakness. It is the expression of the commitment that is building the character that will, over time, make the return to the practice faster and the duration of the old mind's occupation shorter. The test of faith is not designed to break you. It is designed to strengthen what cannot be strengthened any other way. There is no depth of character that is not forged in the presence of pressure. There is no genuine faith that has not been tested by the silence and the contradiction and the return of the familiar fear. The masters who built lasting prosperity, both inner and outer, were not people who were never tested. They were people who kept practicing through the test. This is the test of faith, and you are built for it. Here is how you will know that the transformation is real, not in the arrival of the outer life, though that will come. The first sign arrives earlier, more quietly, in the inner experience itself. And the sign is this: you begin to notice the old thoughts without becoming them. There is a difference between a thought passing through the mind and a mind that has become that thought. In the early stages of the old mind's dominance, there is no gap between the triggering thought and the identity that adopts it. The bill arrives. Fear speaks. You are inside the fear before the gap even existed. There is no observer. There is no witness. There is only the old self, automatically occupying its familiar position, responding in the familiar way, producing the familiar emotional state. In the early stages of the new practice, that gap is very small, and the new self's ability to inhabit it is very limited. The old mind still moves faster than the new awareness, but as the practice continues, the gap widens, and the widening of the gap is the first real sign of transformation. You begin to notice in real time that the old thought is arising. You notice it before it has fully occupied your inner space. You notice it with something that resembles calm witness rather than automatic identification. And in that noticing, something new is possible. A choice is possible that was not possible before. Not always the right choice, not always the new mind's response, but the possibility of a different response, where before there was no possibility at all. This is not a small development. This is a profound one. Because the capacity to witness your own mental patterns without being fully consumed by them is the beginning of genuine inner authority. It is the beginning of a self that is larger than its habits, a self that can contain the old pattern and choose a different one. Not because the old pattern has disappeared, but because the self has grown larger than the pattern that used to define it entirely. James Allen wrote that, "As a man thinks in his heart, so is he." The sign that you are changing is that the thought you return to most naturally in your heart is gradually shifting. Not all at once, not without setbacks, but over the period of sustained practice, you will begin to notice that your default inner conversation has changed. Where once the first thought of the morning was a calculation of shortage, you will find with increasing frequency that the first thought carries a different quality. Where once the response to an unexpected opportunity was automatic contraction, you will find with increasing frequency that something in you opens rather than closes. You will also notice that you choose a new response more quickly than you did before. In the early practice, the interval between the old trigger and the new response could be hours or days. You would experience the fear, fully inhabit the old mind, and then, sometime later, remember the practice and attempt to return to it. As the transformation deepens, that interval shortens. The recognition comes faster. The return to the new mind becomes more immediate, not because you have conquered the old mind, but because the new mind has become more practiced, more familiar, more naturally available than it was before. Another sign is a change in what feels threatening. The old mind felt threatened by abundance, by opportunity, by the unknown, by the open door. As the new identity develops, these things begin to feel less like threats and more like natural territory, not all at once. Not perfectly, but the emotional tone that accompanies a new opportunity shifts from the old tightness to something that resembles interested curiosity. The new door still carries uncertainty, but uncertainty no longer automatically reads as danger. It begins to read as the natural texture of a life that is genuinely expanding. Do not look for perfection. Do not look for the complete absence of the old mind. Look for movement. Look for the direction of change. Look for the evidence that the gap is widening, that the new response is coming more quickly, that the default inner conversation is shifting, that things which once felt threatening are beginning to feel like invitation. These are the real signs of transformation. They are quiet, they are interior. They arrive before the outer circumstances have fully assembled to match them. But they are the signs James Allen was pointing to. They are the evidence that the inner garden is beginning to produce different fruit. There is also a sign in speech, when you notice that you are speaking about your financial life, your future, your capacity, in a language that you would not have used 6 months ago, when you hear yourself offering a more open, less contracted, less permanently defeated version of your own story. That is a sign, not of completion, of genuine movement, of the new character beginning to find its voice in the ordinary moments of ordinary conversation. Trust the movement. Do not demand arrival before you trust the movement. The movement is the transformation. The movement is the work of the law. The movement is the new character assembling itself from the daily practice of the new mind. And the movement, sustained without retreat, without demand for immediate visible confirmation, is what James Allen called the certain way. Not a way that guarantees a specific date, a way that is certain because it is aligned with the law that does not fail. You came to this teaching with something real inside you, not just curiosity, not just the passive consumption of another video that passes a few minutes of time. Something in you recognized the diagnosis. Something in you felt the weight of what it means to have been asking for a new life while returning every day to the mind that rejects it. And that recognition is not nothing. That recognition is the very beginning of the change James Allen described, because you cannot change a pattern you have not yet seen, and you have seen it now. What you do with this moment matters. Not what you intend, not what you feel right now, in this elevated state of hearing a teaching that has touched something real. What you do tomorrow morning, when the day assembles its familiar pressures and the old mind offers its familiar comfort. What you do in that moment is what determines whether this teaching becomes information or transformation. And the difference between information and transformation is the daily practice, the daily choice of which self governs the inner life. James Allen wrote that as long as a man continues to cherish wrong thoughts, so long will suffering and failure attend him. This is not cruelty, this is precision. And he wrote with equal certainty that the moment a man begins to cherish right thoughts, to cultivate genuinely the inner quality of the life he desires, his whole outer world will begin to rearrange itself around that new inner condition. Not tomorrow, not instantly, but with the same consistency and the same reliability as the law of the harvest. What is genuinely cultivated within will eventually, without exception, be expressed without. You are not the old mind. You are not the fear. You are not the familiar poverty. You are not the ceiling that the old self could not exceed. You are not the accumulated weight of the old patterns that have shaped the life you are living. You are the one who can choose what to practice in the inner garden. You are the gardener. And the gardener has power, not the power to force the harvest, but the power to plant the right seed, tend it honestly, refuse to return to planting the old seed, and trust the law that runs beneath the visible world as surely as it runs through every living thing that has ever grown from a properly tended soil. The new mind is not a mind that has never known fear. It is a mind that knows fear and chooses a different inner posture. It is a mind that knows the old story and refuses to tell it as the final story. It is a mind that looks at the present circumstances not as the permanent verdict, but as the current condition being changed by the quality of the inner life being practiced right now. The new mind is serious, it is patient, it is not glamorous, it is not a performance. It is a commitment to the most demanding and most liberating form of personal development that exists. The genuine cultivation of the character that belongs to the life you desire. The phrase that carries this teaching into your daily life is not a magical incantation. It is a statement of serious inner commitment. It is the declaration of a person who has understood the law and who has decided to align their inner practice with the life they have been asking for. It is the declaration of someone who is no longer willing to ask from a distance and who has decided instead to become, from the inside, the mind that the desired life requires. Speak it now, inwardly, with the full weight of everything this teaching has placed in you. Speak it not as a wish but as a commitment, not as a feeling but as a direction, not as a temporary inspiration, but as the first act of a new daily practice that you are beginning from this moment forward. Write it below if you are ready to choose it. If you are ready to stop asking from the outside and begin becoming from the inside. If you are ready to release the identity of the old mind and inhabit, thought by thought, day by day, the identity that belongs to the life you desire. Write it and mean it. I release the old mind and become the life I desire. If that phrase spoke to something genuine in you, write it in the comments below. Not as a performance, not to be seen. Write it because you are choosing it, because writing it is the first act of the new mind in this moment. Because the word that is spoken or written with genuine interior commitment is not neutral. It is the mind declaring its new direction to itself. And the mind that hears its own genuine commitment repeated has taken its first concrete step away from the old pattern and toward the new one. There is more of this teaching ahead. James Allen did not write about thought and character in isolation. He wrote about the law of becoming, about how the inner self must be genuinely occupied before the outer life can genuinely change, about what it means to stand in the middle of unchanged outer circumstances and refuse to let those circumstances define the inner identity. If you want to continue walking through these teachings, remain with this channel. The next law will meet you when you are ready. The masters who shaped this wisdom were not people who discovered a shortcut to prosperity. They were people who did the serious, patient, unglamorous inner work of becoming the person whose life could hold what they were building toward. Their legacy is not a technique, it is a law. And the law is available to any person who is willing to take it seriously enough to apply it not for a week, but for as long as it takes for the new character to become the natural self. This channel exists because these teachings deserve to be heard with the depth and the seriousness they were written with. If this teaching has served you today, let the comment below be your first act of the new mind. And if you are ready to go deeper, the next teaching is waiting. The work continues. The law does not sleep, and neither does the self that is right now, in this moment, beginning to become the life it desires.